Hi, I'm Joey Chow, and this week we're going to talk about this weird thing that happened in Taiwan recently. On January 5th, our stock market did something that it had never done before. The TAIEX broke 30,000 points. TSMC's share hit record highs. Market analysts were celebrating, they rejoiced, and Taiwan's per capita GDP officially surpassed both Japan and South Korea for the first time in history. On that same day, my aunt texted me complaining about egg prices. Okay, she didn't. She doesn't buy her own eggs. But if she did, she's not wrong to complain, because while Taiwan's GDP is forecast to grow 4.8% this year, maybe higher in some quarters, fastest in Asia for sure, the cost of a basket of 17 household essentials rose 2.57% last year. Eggs, pork, rice, bread, the stuff you actually need to live, all more expensive. So what's going on? How can Taiwan be simultaneously the fastest growing economy in Asia and a place where regular people feel financially squeezed? Actually, this isn't just a Taiwan problem. It's everywhere AI is reshaping economies. But Taiwan is the most extreme version of it, and that makes us the canary in the coal mine for what's coming globally.
Taiwan's manufacturing sector is picking up steam after months of contraction. According to S&P Global, the sector saw its strongest growth in December after months of weak performance. S&P says this is due to rising production and expected future demand. Taiwan's export-driven economy has seen record high overseas orders, especially in the tech sector, thanks to the AI boom.
Taiwan's main stock index is seeing a historic rally. The TAIEX closed up about 1.3% on Friday, the first day of trading this year, following its record high closing on New Year's Eve. That puts it more than 25% higher than the same day last year. The gains are heavily concentrated in chip makers and AI hardware suppliers, especially in one company, chip giant TSMC. Their stock is up more than 44% from last year, accounting for more than 64% of all the gains in the TAIEX. And despite concerns about a global tech bubble, some experts say the momentum shows little sign of stopping. But that success isn't shared across the board. While tech is booming, traditional industries like textile and raw materials are seeing declines. Still, it caps off a historic year for Taiwan's economy. Despite severe market volatility due to U.S. tariffs, Taiwan has outperformed expectations, with GDP growth estimates for 2025 now hovering around 7%. While many forecasts predict about half that level of growth for 2026, officials are more bullish. Looking at today's stock performance, investors seem to be cautiously optimistic. Now, there are still a few unknowns going into 2026, especially how U.S. tariffs and a U.S.-Taiwan trade deal might play out. But Taiwan's growth seems poised to continue, if a bit slower, and still concentrated in a single sector.
Let's start with why everyone is so excited. Taiwan's economy is, by most measures, absolutely crushing it right now. The government forecast 4.8% GDP growth for 2026. In some quarters, it exceeded 7%, and that's the fastest among Asia's newly industrialized economies. Our per capita GDP hit $38,000 last year, officially surpassing Japan and South Korea for the first time, and the stock market's total capitalization were climbed to 7 globally, overtaking France. And then there's TSMC, our industry titan in the semiconductor field. On January 5th alone, TSMC shares jumped 5.36%, contributing about 680 points to the TAIEX's 755-point rally. Now, that's not a typo. One company drove nearly 90% of the entire market's gain that day. TSMC's market cap is now over 42 trillion new Taiwan dollars. For context, that's larger than the entire GDP of many countries. Jensen Huang, NVIDIA's CEO, is coming back to Taiwan at the end of this month to sign the lease for NVIDIA's new headquarters in Beito Shiling Technology Park. NVIDIA just unveiled its Vera Rubin platform at CES, 6 new chips, all made by TSMC using advanced 3-nanometer processes. Meanwhile, TSMC just bought another 900 acres in Arizona for 6.28 billion new Taiwan dollars, nearly doubling the US land holding as it builds out what will eventually be 6 fabrication plants, 2 packaging facilities, and an R&D center. So yeah, if you just look at the headlines, Taiwan is winning the AI economy sweepstake. But there is where things get uncomfortable. While Taiwan's overall consumer price index rose relatively modest, 1.66% last year, the lowest in 5 years, that aggregate number hides a lot of pain. The government tracks a basket of 17 household essentials: eggs, sugar, rice, bread, pork, cooking oil, instant noodles, shampoo, toilet paper, the stuff you actually buy every week. That basket up 2.57% in December compared to a year earlier. Egg prices led the increase, followed by pork and rice. Stuff that I love the most. Housing cost rose 1.86%, with rent up 1.99%. And if you work outside the tech sector, things look even rougher. Taiwan's non-tech manufacturing exports are contracting. Traditional industries are struggling. The service sector performance is quote-unquote mixed, which is economists speak for some people are doing fine, most are not. Fast forward to this week, and President Lai Ching-te announced plans to raise the minimum wage to 30,000 new Taiwan dollars this year. That's the 10th consecutive year of increases, which sounds good until you realize it's necessary because wage growth for most people hasn't kept pace with the concentration of wealth at the top. So clearly there is something structurally weird happening here. And to understand it, we need to talk about a concept that's becoming increasingly important in financial markets: concentration risk. There's a financial podcast that I listened to. They had a great way of framing this. In the US S&P 500, roughly 1/3 of the entire market capitalization is concentrated in 7 companies: Apple, Microsoft, Alphabet, Amazon, Nvidia, Meta, and Tesla. You know them. They're the Magnificent Seven, as people call them. The problem? The index literally cannot make new highs if those 7 stocks stall, because they're such a massive portion of the total. Taiwan has an even more extreme version of it. We have one. TSMC isn't just the biggest stock on the block. It's so dominant that on days when TSMC surges, the entire market surges. When TSMC stabilizes or falls, the market follows. We have essentially built an economy where one company's performance determines whether we're in a boom or recession, and the government has no control. Well, wouldn't say no. I mean, the National Development Council does have a stake in the company, but not enough control over how this company calls its shots. And here's the really uncomfortable part. Even so-called diversification doesn't protect you anymore. The podcast that I listened to put it this way: diversification today often only spreads single stock risk. Because diversification today often only spreads single stock risk, not systemic AI risk. You can own a broad index fund, or you can spread your bets around sectors, but if everything is ultimately riding on the AI thesis, you're not actually diversified. You're just exposed to the same risk in multiple forms. So that brings us to the question that's going to define 2026, not just for Taiwan, but globally. Is the AI boom sustainable at these valuations, or are we front-loading years of growth that may never actually materialize? Well, I use AI, and I think that it certainly helps the workflow. But how much of this extra productivity can actually turn into real value? Well, that's basically 2 ways of looking at this. The optimistic way says that AI is different. It's actually lifting real productivity, changing how work gets done, justifying higher valuations because the cash flow will eventually catch up. Companies can quote-unquote front-load market expectations because the fundamentals will arrive later. And the pessimistic view says, we've seen this movie before. Infrastructure overbuilds, railroads, fiber optics, you name it, eventually benefit society. But the investors who funded them often suffer irreversible losses. Society gets cheaper communication or faster transport, but shareholders get wiped out. So right now, markets seem to be, quote unquote, testing AI valuations constantly. Prices rise, then earnings have to justify them, then prices rise again. NVIDIA's P/E ratio has actually come down significantly over time. This, by the way, is the price over earnings ratio, which is a way for you to look at just how justified the price of a stock is compared to that particular company's earnings. So P/E ratio has been coming down significantly over time, not because the stock crashed, but because earnings actually caught up. That's healthy until it's not. And then there's the thing that should worry Taiwan specifically. We're not building AI applications. We're making the chips that power them. If the AI boom slows down, or worse, if it turns out the revenue models don't work and companies start cutting back on infrastructure spending, TSMC still benefits, but not at these growth rates. And if TSMC's growth slows, what happened to our economy? Remember, it's one company that props up the entire stock market. So there's an even more immediate risk that financial analysts are starting to focus on: the money problem. AI development is insanely capital intensive. OpenAI, Anthropic, other major labs, they're burning through tens of billions of dollars. These aren't normal startup burn rates. They're talking about cash consumption that dwarfs anything we saw in previous tech cycles. And here's why that matters. AI valuations assume relatively loose monetary conditions. You can just justify how multiples and aggressive growth spending when capital is cheap and abundant. But if liquidity tightens, if there is a shortage of money because, well, people are burning through too much of it, if interest rates stay higher for longer and it's harder to borrow money for an extended period of time, if venture capitals pull back, investors don't want to put in more money. If large investors get spooked and start getting off the ship, suddenly the entire structure starts to wobble. So, at least one or two significant corrections may take place in 2026. That's what I'm projecting. Not necessarily at full collapse, but valuation resets as market demand proof that all the spending is actually generating returns. So for Taiwan, that's terrifying because our entire economy story right now is we make the chips for AI, the whole country. So if AI stumbles, we don't have a backup plan. But we also need to understand what's happening through a geopolitical lens, because Taiwan's semiconductor dominance isn't just an economic story. It's a national security story. There's this concept, a modern extension of the Monroe Doctrine. The original Monroe Doctrine said the US wouldn't tolerate European powers interfering in the Western Hemisphere. And the modern version, as President Donald Trump so elegantly put it, the US is aggressively controlling strategic resources globally and treating those resources as leverage in great power competition. So they use Venezuela as an example. The US now effectively control Venezuelan oil production, sales, and revenue flow. It's not just sanctions, it's direct operational control, which proceeds are held by the US Treasury and resources sold through mechanisms that benefit American interests. Taiwan semiconductors are the 21st century equivalent of Venezuelan oil, and TSMC's Arizona expansion isn't just about supply chain resilience or serving American customers more efficiently, it's about resource control. The US government wants advanced semiconductor production on American soil because in a crisis, trade war, military conflict, whatever, they cannot afford to be dependent on chips made in Taiwan or even in Asia. From Taiwan's perspective, this creates a paradox. Being indispensable to the global AI economy gives us geopolitical protection. No one wants to disrupt the sources of chips that power everything. But concentrating so much economic value in one industry makes this a single point of failure. And as TSMC builds more capacity in Arizona, does that increase or decrease Taiwan's leverage? Well, we're still debating that. So here's where we land. Taiwan isn't just one economy anymore. We're two economies that happen to share the same island. That's gonna be hard to wrap your head around. Let's walk through this. There's the tech Taiwan, TSMC, media tech, the AI server supply chain, Hong Hai or Foxconn, the companies whose revenue grew double digits last year and whose employees got bonuses and whose shareholders made a fortune. If you work in tech Taiwan, 2025 was incredible. If you own TSMC stock, you're thrilled. And then there is traditional Taiwan. Small and medium manufacturers, service workers, people running restaurants or traditional export businesses, families trying to keep up with rising costs for eggs and porks and rent. If you live there in traditional Taiwan, GDP growth is an abstraction. It doesn't touch your life. This isn't just unique to Taiwan. The US has made the same split, big tech versus Main Street. Korea has it too, with Samsung and memory chip dominance versus everyone else. But Taiwan's version is more extreme because our economy is smaller and more concentrated. This is where financial literacy and generational anxiety kicks in. They said most people across generations will face the same persistent anxiety for money, not fame, not prestige, just having enough money to live comfortably. And that means understanding these economic dynamics isn't optional. If you don't understand why GDP can grow while your purchasing power shrinks, you can't navigate this system. You're just hoping things work out. The most dangerous error isn't being wrong, it's realizing that you were wrong too late. In markets, if you're wrong about a stock and realize it quickly, you can cut your losses. But if you stay wrong for months or years, by the time you realize it, the damage is structural. You can't get that time or that capital back. Worse yet, you may have put in too much of the money that you made with your sweat and tears, with your time, and now it's all gone into nothing. Taiwan's policymakers are facing the same problem with our K-shaped economy. Right now, they're making a bet. Oh, by the way, I should explain that K-shaped economy, the letter K, the upward stroke is what we talked about, the tech Taiwan. And the downward stroke is the traditional Taiwan. One takes flight while the other slowly, gradually plummets. Right now, they're making a bet that AI-driven growth will eventually lift all boats. That TSMC's success will create enough wealth to fund social programs, wage increases, support for traditional industries. But what if that's wrong? What if the wealth concentration just keeps widening? And by the time we realize we needed to diversify our economy or build stronger safety nets or invest in sectors beyond semiconductors, would it be too late? Social and political costs can become irreversible, just like investment losses. And as we said, without financial literacy, a person, a family, can see years of their hard work go into nothing. What about a whole country? See years of their investment go into no growth. What President Lai Ching does, minimum wage increase is a step, but it's a band-aid. The 93 billion new Taiwan dollars allocated to support small and medium enterprises, helpful, but it's not structural. We're treating symptoms while the underlying condition worsens. So what does all of that mean? I'm sorry if this particular episode sounds bleak, but beyond the reefs of Taiwan, we're not an outlier. It's a leading edge of what happens when a single technological revolution reshapes an entire economy. Markets reward concentration. Societies need breadth. And the question is whether Taiwan's policymakers can figure out how to share AI-driven wealth before the social costs become structural. Because once again, the most dangerous error isn't being wrong, it's realizing that you were wrong too late. Thank you for listening to the show. I'm Joey Chow. Tune in next week to find out about socioeconomic issues that are faced by Taiwan and their broader impact around the world beyond the reefs of this island nation.